into the war with Iran. MS Now spoke with a dozen family members and sailors and Marines aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, who say they're extremely concerned about the morale, safety, and conditions on that ship. The 5,000-person crew has been at sea for 9 straight months and engaged in combat operations since the beginning of the war against Iran, all the way back in February. Many family members describe their kids or spouses telling them about non-operational toilets, moldy showers, laundry facilities that were broken for weeks, and extended periods with no hot water for showering. The families say their loved ones have described food shortages and standing in line at the ship's store for an hour or more, even while it often lacks basic supplies like toothpaste, soap, and deodorant. Let's bring in MS Now Pentagon reporter Priya Sridhar, who broke that story. Former Acting Army Secretary Patrick Murphy also back with us. Priya, it's a great story. People think about service members, in this case sailors, in a combat zone. They, of course, think about the dangers the enemy may pose. They perhaps think less about just the conditions they have to live with each and every day, sounding, from your reporting, downright miserable and at times maybe even dangerous.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, you know, the Lincoln just set a record in the Navy for having the most continuous days at sea, with more than 200 days underway. They left San Diego in November. They had a brief stop in Guam in December, and then they didn't stop for a port call again until early July, just briefly in Oman, where most of the sailors were able to get off the ship, but they had to stay in port. And really what the families were telling me is they're very worried about exhaustion here. Most of their family members are working 12 to 14-hour shifts. They're depending on their job. They're not getting any days off. And when you talk about a flight deck on an aircraft carrier, this is one of the most dangerous places in the military. You're having high-speed aircraft taking off and landing. You have munitions, weapons, and bombs being moved around at a very fast pace. And the service members are also being exposed to, you know, really loud noises for a sustained period of time, which can really lead to long-term injuries like hearing loss. So when you're talking about exhaustion, when you're talking about low morale, because now this deployment has been extended for a second time and there's no end in sight, they're worried that those things could lead to accidents that could potentially even be deadly. I want you to take a listen to what some of them told me.
They didn't choose to be there. They volunteered to be there. They're willing to be there, and they're doing their best. So they want our support. And part of that support means we have to have the tools to do our job. That means the fuel. That means the food, right? That means the food. That means the toothpaste and the deodorant. That means all of it, right? Now,
I don't think it's the ship is the issue. I think it's our president, it's our government that's not helping the morale. I think the ship is doing what they can do with what they're given. But I think our government needs to be doing more for our military that's sitting over there.
And so, you know, you're hearing from them about exhaustion, but they're saying that, you know, even at the end of their shifts, the fact that these sailors and Marines can't take showers, they can't wash their uniforms. I had some family members tell me that they believe that prisoners and inmates in jail are treated with more dignity and respect than our service members.
So, Patrick, let's get your take on this. What does this tell you about Pete Hegseth's military?
We're stretched pretty thin, and it's not just, I mean, Priya did a great job in his reporting. Jonathan, the one point she made in her article, which I'd like to highlight, there's over 10,000 shorties off the USS Lincoln. I mean, you know, in the Pentagon, we used to say, amateurs talk strategy, experts talk logistics. The USS Lincoln is the logistics machine there in the Middle East, you know, pushing out these sorties every day. And it is a very dangerous, you know, job. And these are the ultimate warriors, whether you're a sailor or a soldier. The fact is that you are doing really tough jobs. And so my heart and thoughts and prayers are going out to these sailors and their families. I know they've been extended twice. They're stretched pretty thin right now.
And this is not a new boat. The ship launched in the 80s. Priya, talk to us. It was also a conflict with no real end in sight. Like there's, negotiations off and on. Every so often the president, authorizes some sort of strike. They could be there for a long time to come.
Yeah, and that's something I heard repeatedly from the families as well, is that, they understand that their loved ones volunteered to be in the military, right? They're not expecting to be on a Carnival cruise here. They don't expect buffets. They don't expect, a hot tub. They understand that the conditions are going to be rough. They signed up to go to war. But I think what's lacking here is any clear strategy. And they said, we're ready to do a mission and complete a mission. But what we're failing to understand is what this mission actually is and when is it going to end. So I think really what they're looking for is some goalpost that, they can keep an eye on and some relief at the end of all of this. We had 3 aircraft carriers simultaneously in the Middle East, which hasn't, you haven't seen a military buildup like that since 2003. And this has been a war that has largely been fought by the Navy. When you think about who's been imposing the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and who's been launching those airstrikes on Iran. And so, they say enough talk about the stockpiles and the depletion of weapons and the $67 billion that Secretary Hegseth has gone to the Hill to ask for. Let's talk about our service members.
Priya Sridhar, thank you so much for bringing this reporting to us. Great work. Patrick Murphy, thank you as well. We appreciate you both.
It has been more than 260 days since the USS
today, and she's absolutely right. I mean, there will be long-term consequences of this, and there are also strategic consequences. And we're not talking enough about the bigger picture here, which is that we continue to divert resources to a losing war. The George Washington is coming from another station to relieve this ship. This administration clearly had no plan going into the war and no clue how to get out of it.
I mentioned you served in the Marines. When you hear what the president had to say, that the USS Lincoln deployment has not been long enough, what's your reaction?
Typical from a draft dodger. Not a surprise. He's going to spend his weekend at his luxury golf course, not thinking one bit about the troops who he's put in harm's way for a war of choice that he and Hegseth are losing. And, there's another piece of this, too, which is that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines can do extraordinary things in horrific conditions. But it really helps if you believe in the mission. It really helps. When I was a platoon commander on the ground in Iraq, one of the toughest questions I ever got, Jacob, in my life was, sir, why are we risking our lives for this? And that's got to be a question that a lot of sailors aboard the Abraham Lincoln are asking today. Why are we risking our lives for this? A war that's been a total disaster, that's actually backfired because Iran literally is projecting more power today than they ever have in history. Never has the Islamic Republic controlled the entire world economy like they do today. That's got to be incredibly disillusioning for these sailors.
Your point is so well taken, and I actually talked to a former colleague of mine who was a sailor and said he served during Operation Enduring Freedom, and he said we believed in what we were doing. So yeah, we were out there. It was grueling, but we were on board with the mission. And I'm paraphrasing here. I don't want to put words in this person's mouth, but what must it be like to be out there with no end in sight, with no understanding of what we're actually doing? I did want to read to you what the acting secretary of the Navy said in this statement about the Lincoln. I believe this was earlier in the week. This is what the quote says. It says, the Lincoln was extended because the mission demanded it. Deployments are hard. Combat operations make them harder. It also said a leader's responsibility is to take care of their people the best they can while balancing mission requirements. During this deployment, we have seen both. The job is getting done. Our leaders are taking care of people. It sure doesn't seem like the leadership is taking care of our service members.
No, the president, the commander-in-chief, is more worried about his golf game this weekend. Secretary Hegseth has been in the jungle filming promo videos when he should be aboard the Abraham Lincoln, understanding exactly what's going on. The Navy secretary seems totally out of touch with reality here. And of course, none of these people, none of this chain of command has any clue how to end this war. And that's a real problem here. We're using up munitions. We're diverting resources from other places. This is actually why I put a requirement into the defense bill this year for Indo-PACOM, where we should have a lot of assets to prevent and deter conflict with China. They need to report on what the impacts of these wars of choice in Venezuela and in Iran are having on our strategic safety and stability everywhere else in the world. This is dangerous not just for the troops, sailors aboard the Abraham Lincoln, but for all of our forces, because our deterrence is at risk because we're stuck in another war of choice in the Middle East thanks to Donald Trump.
What do you make of the USS Washington leaving the Pacific to potentially relieve the Lincoln? I mean, we talked about that it would leave the Pacific uncovered for the first time in decades. What kind of danger do you see that posing to our national security?
I mean, Jacob, we don't talk about this enough because it's an uncomfortable conversation. But the single biggest risk to the entire world is that China starts a war over Taiwan. That they start a war because they think we're distracted somewhere else, and it literally turns into World War III. A lot of the war games have it going nuclear. And without getting into all the details, that is the biggest risk. Like if you ask me, Seth, what are you most concerned about for your 5-year-old and 7-year-old at home? It's literally a war with China. That would change the world, end the world as we know it today. And our continued presence for decades in the Pacific has helped prevent that from happening. So we don't know what's going to go on. We don't know how emboldened China might be or how other adversaries around the world might be. But this is a dream come true for Xi Jinping, that we're tied down in another war in the Middle East, that we've expended all of our munitions, that troop morale is sagging, and the American public says enough is enough. This is an invitation for conflict elsewhere. And the number one job our troops ever do every single day is not fight wars, but prevent them, deter them from happening. And they're being distracted from their mission by this stupid war in the Middle East.
Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, candidate for U.S. Senate. I so appreciate you being here today. Indispensable. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, Jacob.
Thanks. I want to add, by the way, if you or someone you know is incredible,
fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator.
Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion you're asking for.
Order, Senator Ossoff.
I'll yield my time to Senator Ossoff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your testimony. And General Kane, let me just begin by expressing on behalf of all Georgians our immense gratitude and admiration for the service members who are making tremendous sacrifices and conducting themselves with extraordinary selflessness and professionalism on behalf of the United States and our state's unified condolences and grief for the families of the 4 killed in action. And our hope for a swift recovery for the nearly 100 wounded over the last 2 weeks. And thank you to you for your service to the nation. Mr. Hegseth, you're requesting roughly $68 billion for the department through this supplemental, correct?
67, yes.
And yesterday, your department stated publicly, quote, U.S. forces struck Iranian military command centers, maritime capabilities, missile and drone launch sites, and air defense systems to degrade Iran's ability to continue attacking commercial vessels. That was a press release from your department. Is that a broadly accurate characterization of ongoing operations?
That sounds broadly accurate, yes.
On day 14 of this conflict, Mr. Secretary, day 14, nearly 5 months ago, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. That was on day 14 of the war. Was that an accurate statement?
They didn't have a Navy any longer. It was completely sunk. Their missiles were buried underneath a lot of their underground facilities, and their defense industrial base has been almost completely destroyed. So as far as a military assessment of Iran's capabilities, it didn't mean by any stretch of the imagination absolute zero, but their capabilities
Mr. Secretary,
at the lowest level
you
they've been in a
stated
very
that
long time.
on day 14 of this conflict, in the second week of the conflict, you stated that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Was that an accurate statement? Yes or no?
Iran's ability to challenge the United States of America at the level at which we're capable of.
That's not what I asked you, Mr. Secretary. You said on day 14, Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and, quote, made combat ineffective. Yes or no? Was that an accurate statement?
What the American military has done to the Iranian military is a historic military
Will you
defeat,
answer the
and they're
question
ineffective
under oath?
in that context.
3 weeks later, you declared victory. That was now nearly 4 months ago. 3 weeks after you'd already said Iran's military was destroyed and combat ineffective, you said, quote, Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory. You said Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. And you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Were those accurate statements?
It certainly was, on behalf of the men and women in uniform, a historic military victory over Iran.
Had Iran's military been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come? That was
they
a
had
statement that you made 4 months ago.
They had 160 naval vessels.
You need
in
to
the
answer
Blue Water
the questions,
Navy,
Mr.
and they're gone.
Secretary.
Their
You
Air
said-
Force
you
is
said 4 months
completely
ago.
combat ineffective,
You
and they
said
don't
4
have a
months
defense
ago.
industrial base.
Excuse
So
me, Mr.
describe to me a
Secretary.
country that doesn't have an Air Force, a Navy, or a defense industrial base, and
Mr.
I will describe to
Secretary.
you a country that does not have an effective
Mr.
military.
Secretary, you
It
stated-
can lob missiles.
Mr. Secretary, you stated
missiles,
4
but it's
months
not a
ago
combat
that
effective
Iran's military had been rendered, quote, combat ineffective for years to come. Has Iran's military been, for the last 4 months, combat ineffective?
It's been set back not just years, but likely decades.
You
considering
stated we
it
had,
can't
quote,
build at the level
you
it did
stated-
before, and not
you
even
stated
close.
we
It doesn't
had,
mean
quote-
it doesn't have capabilities.
Mr. Secretary, you stated we had, quote, achieved every single objective. Was that an accurate statement 4 months ago?
The main objective of this was to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Their main sites were obliterated. We're watching over them, and we're holding that issue. If they don't give them up at the table, there's other ways we can take them
Early
away.
in the conflict
Iran will
on
never
day
have a
3,
nuclear
Mr.
weapon.
Secretary, early in the conflict, day 3, you said one of those core objectives was to, quote, destroy the missile threat. And as you restated on day 5, to, quote, obliterate Iran's missiles and drones. Those were clearly and repeatedly stated core objectives of the campaign, which 4 months ago you declared had been completed victoriously with every single objective achieved. Were those objectives achieved 4 months ago?
No one ever stated that every single missile was gone. Ultimately, combat ineffective means they're not able to dig them out of their UGFs and shoot
Had
at
the
us.
missile
It
threat
doesn't mean they
been
don't have
defeated
underground
4 months
facilities
ago?
where they put missiles in them and hold on to them because they're the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism. So we never expected they would stop having capabilities to shoot. The question is at scale against an opponent like the United States of America, which went toe-to-toe with them and Iran couldn't.
You
and cannot
stated on
handle.
March 8th, day 9 of the war, on 60 Minutes, you assured the American people of Iranian surrender. Does that remain your prediction?
Ultimately, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon to threaten the United States of America. That has been the objective, and it remains so.
So just to review, you will not answer whether your statement made on the 14th day of the war that Iran's military had been, quote, destroyed and made combat ineffective was a truthful statement to the American people as you sit here and ask for tens of billions more
The
for the conflict.
senator's time has
But a
expired.
historic and effective military campaign against the largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Won't answer
will
the
ensure they
question.
never
Senator
get a nuclear weapon,
Peters
Senator.
is recognized.
About the destruction of missiles, and yet the missiles that we saw hit recent targets are actually somehow more lethal, more deadly, more maneuverable than what we have seen in the past. So they're obviously improving their munitions. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war, and it still remains closed. And of course, tragically, people, service members, our warfighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying. So what's different? Mr. Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think it smears the sacrifice of the troops that are out there making on behalf of the American people to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Is the
I can
nuclear
get you a
material
ticket-
still there,
I
sir?
can get you a ticket out to CENTCOM and talk to what those Americans are doing, and how committed they are to this effort, and how they want to ensure that Iran never threatens their families with a nuclear weapon. That's the kind of intensity that our warfighters have about making sure that Iran isn't capable of doing
Secretary
that.
Hegseth, if you listen to my comments, you would have heard me say how amazing our warfighters are.
I heard failure. And the word heard. I heard exactly
I will
what
tell
you said.
you how I use the
Heard
word
exactly
failure,
what you
because
said.
I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership. You don't have a strategy. You don't have a long-term plan to actually win this war. Win the war. The men and women are going to be able to do it, but they need to have leadership. When will you show leadership? When will you show
Why don't you
leadership?
show some leadership and stand up to your fellow Democrats who won't fund the troops, who stand and play partisan politics while you don't give us the money? You want to stand up here and talk about the troops? You won't show any political
Secretary
courage to actually fund our department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator.
Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion. You're asking for $1.5 trillion. It's not a question of money. It's a question of leadership and understanding what it takes to actually win.
Political cowardice of Democrats who won't fund the troops.
Senator's time has expired. This will conclude our hearing.